Winter is without doubt my favorite time as a wildlife photographer. And in this video for Wex Photo Video, we're going to be going out on location to take you behind the scenes of how I work. My name is Tom Mason, and today you're joining me out in the field. Today then, we've come out to look for short-eared owls that are easily one of my favourite subjects to photograph in the winter. And what a fantastic year it is. Due to high breeding success in Scandinavia, there's been a real bolster in the number of owls coming to the UK shores. That of course makes it a perfect time to get out and shoot images of them. One of the things with wildlife photography is all about being reactive to what subjects are doing, and if you get a year where numbers are high of a certain subject, it makes sense to go out and photograph them. So when it comes to finding the perfect location for short-eared owls, it's all about finding isolated grasslands. If you can find an isolated group or section of grassland that's surrounded by different habitat, fields, farmland, that isn't ideal for the owls, you're going to find a dense population of rodents that's going to confine the owls to one area and make it much easier to get closer and photograph them consistently. So one of the first things I do when I get to any location is walk around and take in the environment. It's really key to get a good idea of how the light's going to change through the day. Now I know this spot, so I know that the light is going to track down behind me and drop down over there. That means that as long as I'm facing this way, I'm going to get gorgeous light as the sun starts to dip. Now today, of course, there are a few other photographers here. It's a fantastic day. Today I'm going to choose somewhere a little bit further away so I can not disturb those guys whilst I talk you through my settings. So over the last couple of hours we haven't had too much owl activity, and to be honest it's not too much of a problem because it gives me a great chance to talk you through the settings that I usually have programmed when I'm doing bird in flight images like this. Now one of the most important things when it comes to bird in flight is making sure that you freeze any movement. Having a high shutter speed of around 2000 of a second is often what I am aiming for. Now this will mean that I have to fluctuate my ISO and aperture to achieve it. Here I've got my 600mm f4, but usually I'm stopped to around 5.6 to f8. And of course, if I've got beautiful conditions like this, I can do that to extend the depth of field and maximize my potential of getting those razor sharp images. Then when it comes to the ISO, as the sun starts to drop, I'll just incrementally increase it. I'm at about 400 right now, and I'll go up to 800, 1600 as we start to lose the light to maintain that shutter speed for as long as possible. Now when it comes to the autofocus, it's another key thing to have set up for birds in flight. I'm using a variety of modes on my Nikon Z9 here, having single point AF that is going to allow me to focus in on any kind of birds that might be on the ground or off at a distance. I have a group mode. This allows me to use a wider selection of the autofocus modes, and in Nikon cameras it tends to focus to the front. This is really important because if I've got a bird crossing a background that's quite busy, it's going to make sure that the autofocus is really pinpointing a subject that's in front of the background. Now when it comes a bit closer and it's really larger in the frame, I might switch over to use the 3D tracking. Nowadays with the IAF and stuff like that we've got in these modern cameras, it allows me to really lock onto the eyes of the animal and nail the focus as it's coming closer. Personally, how I like to frame up is to have my bird moving into space, putting out on the the right corner if it's moving right to left, or left corner if it's moving left to right, and track with my subjects. Getting these things in your head before the birds actually come into the frame is going to allow you to kind of nail those shots and have an idea of your composition before you make any images. Now with the light settling and going down, it really is coming into a great time for the owls. It's a perfect day other than the slightly stronger than ideal wind. But if the light keeps like this and we get some owls that come around at the last hour of the day, we still might have some chances to make some great shots. So we're getting into the last of the light now, and this afternoon we haven't got too lucky with the owls. We haven't seen any in fact, and to be honest, that's par for the course with wildlife photography. It can't always work out. I can't be too worried because, to be honest, over the last month I've had some great opportunities to photograph short-eared owls on the location and made some images that I'm really happy with. And when it comes to getting out in the field and doing wildlife photography regularly, you've got to understand that there's going to be more days when you don't see stuff than the days when you nail those images. And I think that's really part of what makes it so exciting to be a wildlife photographer. When it all comes together for that 1% of the time, it really makes those very special encounters. But with the light dropping off, it's probably time to pack up and head to the car. We'll be out tomorrow to see what else we can find. As is always the way with wildlife photography, as we made our way back to the car, we finally caught a glimpse of a short-eared owl who's quite distant and flew away over the river. But as he came back round into the car park, I just spotted a little owl who sat out in the woods. You know, it's moments like this that just make any day worth it when you get out watching nature. And even though it's probably too dark to get some pictures, it still really is lovely to see. So today we're back in the fens, and you know, one of the most important things when it comes to wildlife photography, if you want to make more pleasing images, is to get yourself on your subject's level. Now, a lot of the time that's going to mean getting low to the ground and positioning yourself just as close to the floor as possible. You're going to create less of an impact on your subject. But a lot of the time it's going to mean you can get a bit closer and, you know, be nearer to the wildlife that you want to photograph. Secondly, it's going to maximize the potential of your aperture. Now I'm working here with the 600mm and I'm right wide open at f4. But because I'm so parallel to my subject, just a couple of swans out on the lake, on the frozen lake here, I can even stop down to f5.6 or f8 and still get really nice out of focus foregrounds and backgrounds, but maximize the depth of field on my subject to make those sharper and punchy images. So when it comes to building a frame within wildlife photography, composition, of course, is key. And there's a few things we want to be thinking about when we're building it out. Now, firstly is the way that the subject interacts with the space. Most of the time when I'm composing for wildlife shots, I want my wildlife looking into the space that I'm photographing. Another thing that you want to think about is building layers into your images. What you want to make sure that you're doing is using these elements to also conceal ugly pieces of the frame. I also like to tie in my foreground and background with kind of the colour scheme. Here in a reed bed, obviously the foreground reeds match perfectly with the colour of the reeds in the background. And by using these two with the kind of contrast of the bird in the middle, I can make a much more pleasing frame to the eye that really draws me to a subject. Now, if you're new to wildlife photography and wildlife watching in general, one of the hardest things to kind of get your eye in for is actually finding subjects in different environments. Now, my first piece of advice for that is to go after the common stuff first. You know, garden birds, you know, your local duck pond, they're going to be places that you can get access to wildlife to really start making some images. Now, if you want to kind of push a little bit further into understanding more of British wildlife and finding different subjects out on locations like in wider nature reserves, it always pays to kind of get out there first and actually meet the people on the nature reserves. Talk to people in the hides, approach them and ask if anything's been about. Ask them where you might find a certain subject if you're struggling to pick things out. Don't be afraid to just ask what something is. That gain of information and knowledge is going to be something that really kits you up as a wildlife photographer for when you go out on your own. So then you can come back to these locations, spot subjects again, and refine your images by working for long periods of time, being patient. Eventually, it'll all come together. Up ahead, there's a stone chat, and he's just making his way along the path, along the side, hopping up onto the foliage and then down. He's just looking for little grubs and stuff like that. Now, stone chats can be pretty confiding birds if you find them when they're feeding. And so watching animal behaviour like this is key as a photographer. In order to move forward, I want to wait till he hops down a little bit, go after some food, and then I can just shift my position up. But actually, he just crossed the path. It's perfect. There he is. So I'm just framing him up on a reed mace. He might seem a little far away, but I'm always after environmental pictures as much as those kind of smack in your face portraits. Positioning him up to the corner of the frame, looking into the image and having the whole kind of reed bed surrounding him is a really nice frame to get. And of course, if you don't have a 600, you've got a 300mm or something a bit shorter, this is a style of image you can go after quite consistently and make some really nice pictures. So the stone chat's just flown off now, and it was a brief encounter, as often the way when it comes to wildlife photography. I framed up two different styles of image, that more environmental shot where he's looking across the reed bed, and then a closer one when he was backlit. That was really quite nice because some of the reed heads are kind of getting that kind of flare from the sun. Now, when I'm shooting like that, I was using single point autofocus. In a busy environment like this, I need to pinpoint on my subject to really pick it out and make sure I'm locking in that frame. And when I'm shooting backlit, I'm making sure that I'm underexposing quite significantly so I don't clip the highlights. Reflected light is always much brighter than that coming straight onto your subject, so you've always got to account for that when you're framing up and shooting those style of images. Right, so for the last couple of minutes I've been photographing a reed bunting who's off in the reeds in front of me. Now, most of the time when we're out taking pictures, we want to position ourselves with the sun over our shoulder for that nice, natural, beautiful light on our subject, especially at the later in the day when it's nice and golden. Now, getting towards the middle of the day, the light is a little bit harsh, but by shooting up and against it in the winter, it's still low enough that I can backlight subjects. The reeds backlit look fantastic. You can see all the seed heads and everything like that. And with the reed bunting moving around, I can just pick him out and make an image that's got a bit more atmosphere to it. So I just thought I'd take a minute to run you through my equipment that I've got with me on this shoot. Now, don't get too overwhelmed by the amount of gear I've got. I've been shooting professionally for a decade now, building my equipment up over time. And if you're just getting started, you really don't need such a big investment into your gear. Now, my primary camera of choice is the Nikon Z9. It's the flagship of the Nikon range, and I just absolutely love it. I love a bigger camera with a larger battery, great weather sealing for kind of any conditions that, life can throw at me. The sensor in this, 45 megapixels is more than enough resolution I ever need. And the speed and the performance of the AF and the frames per second at 20 frames per second is just stunning for wildlife photography. It really is a great camera. The lens I've got on the front here is the Nikon 600mm f4 ZTC. It's the only 600mm prime that has a built-in teleconverter, and it is wonderful when I'm working with more distant subjects and I want those beautiful portraits. Just flips in, flips out. It is absolutely wicked. Love this bit of kit. When I'm shooting professionally, I always bring two cameras with me, not only to make sure I've got a backup to my primary model, but also to give me a second option for a second lens. Now on this, I've got the 300mm f4 PF on it. I think this is a great lens for so many photographers. If you're just getting started, you can pick one of these up secondhand for about 600 to 800 quid, depending on its condition. I actually picked mine up from Wex used, and it's a superb lens. Alongside that, I always bring a 35mm prime lens. I love having one of these just because if I can get the chance to do more of an environmental shot, maybe I've got an opportunity to get close to my subject and get more of a wide angle image, this is really beautiful for that. The other essentials, of course, I've got batteries, memory cards, enough to get me through full shoots. My binoculars are a really big tool that I use every single day, even when I don't have the cameras with me, for tracking down subjects, spotting stuff at a distance, and getting my positioning ready for the actual images. These are an essential that I never leave home without. In addition to that, and my clothing. It's probably one of the most important things you can invest in. A good down jacket, solid trousers, and great boots that are going to keep you warm. The last two things, of course, a good rucksack to carry all my gear. You know, this stuff's heavy and I want to make sure I'm looking after my back and getting comfortable out onto location. And finally, of course, my tripod. It's something I very rarely leave home without. Having the support for the long telephoto lens is absolutely brilliant. And also, just the reduce of fatigue that you get from working from a tripod. I can set up a shot, wait behind it, and stake my subjects out for a long period of time. That's why it's really such an essential. Right, so this afternoon we've come over to Welney, and due to the extensive amount of rain we've had in East Anglia over the last couple of weeks, as you can see, it is completely flooded out. Now, usually this might provide you with quite a difficult situation, but as wildlife photographers, these sort of things happen, and we have to make do with what's in front of us. Now, to me, as much as this is a bit of a disappointment because I can't get under the hide into the normal shooting position, I can utilise the footpath and the fact that I can wade up to my knees in my boots and get some low angles here. It's given me some chances to get, eye level shots of hooper swans. That is something I very rarely get the opportunity to do. I think this is a perfect illustration of how changing your perspective is so important in photography. If I'm up here and I shoot down on the birds, I'm not going to get pleasing shots. They're just going to look like your average swan image. If I get low on the ground, I shoot dead flat across that water. It separates the bird, it means that the backgrounds go more blurred out, and I can just get a more punchy, interesting shot that's just far more of a stunning wildlife picture than me standing looking down on my subject. Well, as you can see, it's the end of the day now, and it kind of marks the end of our time up in Norfolk. Hasn't been as successful as we hoped, but I want to reiterate that is quite honestly what wildlife photography is a lot of the time. As a professional, I go out on location, I can spend days and weeks going without making a perfect frame. I don't want people to get disheartened if they go out on location and don't come back with any award-winning images straight away. Every time you go out, you learn something new. You have opportunities to get to know a habitat a little bit more. That means next time you come, you're going to have a better opportunity and a better kind of wealth of knowledge to execute those pictures. And when it all comes together, it's of course even more exciting. And remember, when you post your images of wildlife this winter, use the hashtag WexHow2 so that we can see what you've been up to. And final things to remember when you get out photographing wildlife this winter is to get eye level, wrap up warm and invest in your clothing, and always bring your tripod. I've been Tom Mason. Thank you for joining me on this Wex Photo video workshop, and I'll see you in the next one.